In this presentation, we're going to revise 4 major cities in China, that is Hong Kong, Macau, Beijing, and Shanghai. First of all, Hong Kong. You need a passport to visit Hong Kong, and your visit can last no longer than 7 days. Typical sights in Hong Kong are the white and red taxis. You often see them in movies, the skyline of Hong Kong, and the junk boats. Junk boats first appeared in China during the Han Dynasty. They were small boats built from lightweight woods with flat bottoms. The boat's narrow shape was designed to allow it to glide quickly across the water, while the flat bottom made it possible to dock in shallow waters. Next, let's talk about food. We have the pineapple bun. Its ingredients are flour, eggs, sugar, and lard, so there is no pineapple inside, but the texture of the crust looks like a pineapple. It was invented in Hong Kong in the 60s, and it is sold at all Hong Kong traditional bakeries. It is a special afternoon or breakfast treat. Next, fish eggs. They are salty fish balls. They are boiled and then sauce is added. Next, baguettes or egg puffs. Their main ingredient is egg. They are sweet and they can be added ice cream or chocolate. They are a typical street food. At the bottom you can see Disneyland. Yes, it is Disneyland. There are 2 Disneyland amusement parks in China, one in Hong Kong and a very recent one in Shanghai. And next to that, there's Ocean Park. It is another amusement park in China. Some major attractions are the roller coaster and the drop tower. There is also an aquarium with dolphins, sharks, and lots of other sea animals. The history of Hong Kong is quite important. It is a former British colony, and it still retains some British scenery and customs, such as street names, statues of queens and kings, and the habit of driving on the left. By the early 19th century, the British Empire exported opium to China. In Britain, opium was legal and grown in significant quantities. However, the Chinese state opposed opium trade, and the First Opium War broke out. Britain occupied the island of Hong Kong, and in 1842, Hong Kong became a crown colony of the British Empire. In 1860, at the end of the Second Opium War, with the Convention of Beijing that ended the conflict, the UK gained a perpetual lease over the peninsula around Hong Kong. In 1898, the British and Chinese governments signed the Second Convention of Beijing, which included a 99-year lease agreement for the islands surrounding Hong Kong, called the New Territories. So in 1997, the lease ended and the government of Great Britain transferred control of Hong Kong and surrounding territories to the People's Republic of China. China promised to implement a one-country, two-systems regime, under which for 50 years Hong Kong citizens could continue to practice capitalism and political freedoms, forbidden on the mainland. In Hong Kong, there are also 4 important universities. Next, let's talk about Macau. Macau is also on the sea. You can recognize a beautiful skyline and the Macau Tower. The casino is one of the points of attractions of Macau. It's been the location for different movies, and here gambling is legal. Gambling is practically a religion, equating to 50% of Macau economy. Macau remains the only place in China where gambling is legal, making it a huge attraction for tourists from the mainland and Hong Kong. Now, let's have a look at the ruins of the Cathedral of St. Paul. The front facade and the grand stone stairs are the only remains of the greatest church, the biggest Catholic church in East Asia. in 1637, of course. But this church was destroyed by fires several times and reconstructed several times. Unfortunately, a violent typhoon hit Macau in 1835 and the church caught fire for the third time, leaving its Gloria history. A visitor can only admire a Baroque facade rich in ornamentation. Ornamentation shows a perfect fusion of Western and Eastern cultures. You will see decorations with devils, angels, a symbol of the cross, a Portuguese sailing ship, but you may also see stone lions that are distinctively Chinese, and also chrysanthemum and cherry, as well as Chinese inscriptions. Egg tarts are a specialty of Macau. They are desserts and they are based on the pastéis de nata from Portugal. The tarts were first introduced to Macau by a British pharmacist turned baker called Andrew Stowe. After tasting the tarts in Portugal, Stowe returned to Macau and started experimenting with the recipe to create his own Macau version. Not long after, he opened Lord Stowe's bakery in Macau, and the rest is history. The bakery produces more than 13,000 a day, and they're more popular than ever. But why from Portugal? Because Macau was the final European colony in Asia. It was a Portuguese colony. After more than 400 years as a Portuguese colony, Macau became Chinese in 1999. It is now an autonomous territory under the one country, two systems regime. Under this principle, Macau has been allowed to retain control of its own capitalist economy, legal system, and immigration policy without, at least officially, any interference from Beijing. This state of affairs will endure until 2049. And here we are in the capital of China, Beijing. First of all, you will recognize Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen Square is named after the gate to its north, separating it from the Forbidden City that you can see here. The gate's literal name, Heaven, Peace, Gate, is usually translated Gate of Heavenly Peace. Tiananmen Square has hosted momentous events like the declaration of the People's Republic of China by Chairman Mao in 1949, and it was until 1976 the largest square in the world. Today, Tiananmen Square still hosts ceremonies and National Day anniversaries, as well as many significant foreign and domestic affairs and events. It can hold about 1 million people for public celebrations or gatherings. The Palace Museum. North of Tiananmen Square, you can visit the Forbidden City. It was constructed in 1420 during the early Ming dynasty. It is China's best preserved imperial palace and the largest in the world. The Forbidden City took 14 years to build. It was built by over 1 million workers. It was the imperial palace of China for 492 years. It was a home of 24 emperors, 14 of the Ming dynasty and 10 of the Qing dynasty. It has 980 buildings with over 8,700 rooms. It is 961 meters long from south to north and 753 meters wide. It is surrounded by a 10-meter high wall, which is 2 miles long, that is 3.4 kilometers. It has a 52-meter wide moat around it. It hosts 14 million visitors per year, a maximum of 80,000 visitors per day. Next, you can have a look at the Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven was the most important of Beijing imperial temples. Chinese emperors were thought to be sons of heaven, representatives of heaven on earth. In the Temple of Heaven, emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties worshipped the god of heaven and prayed for good harvest during the winter solstice sacrifice ceremony. 3 days before the ceremony, the emperor, with his officials and guard, would move from the Forbidden City to encamp at the Temple of Heaven. The emperor would wear ceremonial robes and abstain from eating meat and drinking alcohol. One day before, cattle were slaughtered and prepared as sacrificial offerings. There were as many as 700 utensils used for the rituals. No ordinary people were allowed to see the ceremony in imperial times, but now, for a minimal fee, everyone can enjoy it all day long. Early morning is the best time to visit the Temple of Heaven. You will have an interesting experience watching local people doing morning exercises. Next to an older person practicing the slow and flowy movements of Tai Chi, there might be a youngster performing Kung Fu punches and kicks. One group might be learning the ancient martial art of sword fighting, while another might be practicing a traditional dance. Here we can see next the National Stadium. It is the world's largest steel structure and the most complex stadium ever constructed. It is one of the key engineering marvels of the world today. After the 2008 Summer Olympic Games, Beijing National Stadium will host the opening and closing ceremonies for the 2022 Winter Olympics and become the first ceremony venue for both the Summer and Winter Olympic Games in the world. The old Summer Palace used to be the most splendid royal garden, nicknamed the Garden of Gardens. It was considered as the Versailles of the East, with over 1,000 palaces, 100 viewing points, and thousands of treasures. It was a gorgeous place with marble palaces, temples, towers, an extensive collection of gardens, pools, and fountains with swans, ibis, and peacocks. The whole palace was painted and decorated. It was constructed originally founded in 1709 by an emperor as a gift to his fourth son. The construction and expansion lasted for 150 years. But during the Second Opium War in 1860, British and French troops invaded Beijing. They ransacked the old Summer Palace and stole its treasures, which are now displayed in museums around the world. After the looting, they set fire to the entire palace. It was said that the fire lasted for 3 days and nights. Almost all the buildings were burnt down. In 1900, the Eight-Nation Alliance invaded and occupied Beijing. Again, the palace was devastated and the remaining treasures were looted. They destroyed buildings, sawing off pillars and reducing wooden bridges to piles, and pulled down the trees with large ropes. When they had finished, the old Summer Palace was completely destroyed. In Beijing, you can also visit 2 important universities, and one of the traditional foods of Beijing is the roast duck.